Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. Thanks very much for joining us in this next session of the 6G Symposium, which is called 6G, Who Will Set the Agenda? My name is Matthew Bloxham. I'm a senior analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, which is the investment research arm of Bloomberg, and I'm joined today by an incredibly experienced panel. So I'm sure we're set for a great session. Just to give you a few kind of guides in terms of how the session will run before we get into the content, I've got about 90 minutes or so to run through the topic. We'll spend the first 25-30 minutes, I guess, hearing some kind of prepared introductory remarks from each of our panelists. And then once that section is finished, we'll run into an open Q&A session. These sessions, as I'm sure you know, run much more effectively for everybody if there's lots of interaction with the audience. So please, if you do have questions about anything you've heard or questions about something you haven't quite heard yet and you're expecting to hear about them, please do make sure you ask those questions via the Q&A section of the Zoom window, and we'll do our best to make sure we cover those questions in that Q&A session. But before we get on to each of our panelists today, I'll just recap on the topic that we're talking about today. And as I said, this is about 6G and who's going to set the agenda for 6G going forward. And the context for that is that 5G hailed as a generation essentially for enterprise customers. I think it's fair to say, 3 or so years in, the traction certainly with enterprise customers hasn't been that significant, and to a greater or lesser degree, there is an element of mistrust amongst consumers about the technology in many countries. I think GSMA intelligence from the kind of end of 2021 suggests there's about 8% of global mobile connections are 5G. So, still very much at the early stage of that penetration curve. And so I guess the question that we're going to be exploring today is around the need to have end users shape the technology capabilities for this next 6th generation of mobile technology, and how we could do that in practice, because I think that would be quite a significant change from how a lot of the previous mobile technologies have been developed. So with that introduction, I'm going to welcome the first of our panelists today, which is David Lister, who's from Vodafone. He's a senior R&D manager and futurist there. So David, I'm going to hand over to you to open up the session.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. And I've got a few slides that I'll just share. So just bear with me for a second. I'll also get these up. Okay, can I just check you can see my slide in full screen? Great. So thanks for the quick introduction, Matthew. So yeah, my name is David Lister. I work in the Vodafone Group. I'm based in the UK, but I'm responsible for Vodafone's 6G research for the group as a whole. I also wear a second hat. I'm part of an organisation called the Next Generation Mobile Network Alliance, or NGMN, and I'll touch on that alliance in the slides that follow. So you mentioned experience, Matthew. I've been around in Vodafone for the best part of 30 years, so I've seen most of these generations come and go over the years. So for 6G, who will set the agenda? So I think you put quite a provocative statement up in front of us to discuss, which is really helpful. And within that, there's some inherent criticism, I think, about the 5G adoption in enterprise, which I think is quite fair, because it's quite right that in the 3 years to date, there has been little or limited level of traction within enterprises, and there has been this consumer mistrust of the technology. So in this session and in the discussion that follows, the discussion is to review how can we use, or how can we get input from end users to help shape the technology roadmap for the future? How can we do this in practice? So there's 3 points which I would like to cover. I'd like to firstly just discuss where we are today and how we got to where we are today. Then I'll just discuss what's that roadmap looking like going forwards. and then finally having some closing remarks about the engagement with end users. So first thing is, it's important that, as you say, with 3 years into this journey in 5G, and that's actually a very short period of time from our perspective, and we do anticipate really that this is a journey which we're on over the course of this decade as we introduce 5G. 5G will introduce new features, the ones which are up on the screen: enhanced mobile broadband, massive machine type communications and low latency. And there's these other sort of trends in the industry towards multi-access edge computing, or MEC, mobile private networks, and network slicing. And these features will be introduced not just over our 5G networks, but they're also in support of our 4G networks as well. And I think what we will see over the course of this decade is variants of these features being adopted by enterprises. And we will learn as that adoption happens about those features which are successful, those which need further refinement. We'll understand the opportunities and the challenges of each of them as we move forwards. And I think taken together, that will also feed into that 6G transition, that 6G story into the 2030s. So the key point is, at this stage, it's still early days. And I think it's still early days to draw any meaningful conclusions on 5G, because it's very much an evolution as we go forwards. Sorry, next slide is coming up. Yeah, so how do we get to where we are? So, I mean, everybody knows about the 2G, 3G, 4G transitions, 5G, broadly on a 10-year cycle. Hence the reason why we're starting to talk about the 6G transition now for something that will probably become relevant in the 2030s. Maybe what people are less familiar with is the association with the activities performed by the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, because they set out what they call requirements for IMT technologies on this 10-year cycle. And this set of requirements leads to technologies called IMT 2000, IMT Advanced, IMT 2020. And work is currently ongoing to define what may become an IMT for 2030. And to date, those previous IMT technologies, they've been very much driven by specifications and requirements related to the radio interface, particularly speed and latency and other radio related features. And for reasons that I'll come on to, that might be a more difficult story to continue for 6G. And looking at this in a bit more detail, broadly what happens in these 10-year cycles is that there's a research period at the beginning that takes maybe 2, 3, 4 years. That feeds into this ITU and ITU radio communications vision and sets out the requirements for the future IMT technologies. In the previous generations, that's normally associated with new spectrum, which is identified through the World Radio Congress, WRC. And following that, the technology organizations such as 3GPP go away and develop the appropriate standards that fulfill those IMT requirements. And then it's left to operators like ourselves and Vodafone to go and acquire spectrum, that's normally through auction, deploy the networks and then commercialize the system. And then that cycle has repeated itself successively over the last 2 or 3 generations. And indeed, there is quite a lot of inertia in the industry to follow that cycle, because previously it's been judged to have met the industry's needs very well. It's delivered incredible levels of innovation. It's created very efficient radio cellular systems, and ultimately served customers very well. It's given them incredible capabilities that would probably have been unimaginable 20 or 30 years ago. But I mentioned that this historic approach might be a challenge as we go forwards. And the reason why I say this is because the transition from 4G to 5G has created a very capable technology, a technology that's able to support data rates, or peak data rates of up to 20 gigabits per second, and very low latencies, which is the responsiveness of the network down to 1 millisecond. Now, 20 gigabit per second is well beyond what we can actually deliver today commercially over cellular systems. And the reason for that is multiple. There's physical limits to do with the amount of radio spectrum that's available, radio propagation characteristics, the amount of power that we can consume and radiate, and indeed just the commercial viability of network densification and the number of sites that would be required to deliver that type of capability. Now, historically, these generations have tried to multiply speeds and data rates by a factor of 10 and a factor of 100. But when you consider where and the capability we have today with 5G, it does question what's the value of trying to multiply that by a factor of 10 yet again, because the opportunity for us to deliver that commercially would be very much less. And that performance would only be available in very limited areas. So there are some challenges, I think, just to the fundamental capability of where we can go with radio and radio networks as we go forward. So is this legacy approach still valid? And I think what we're going to find is that there's going to be some tension between a 5G and a 5G evolution story, and maybe some more innovative, disruptive levers coming in from the 6G side. So with 5G, we've got a really high performance, incredible high performance system, which today has the capability of exceeding anything our customers really need. It's very spectral efficient, and it's very energy efficient. It's cloud native, it's scalable, all these good things, it's forward looking, and it should lead to a further cost reduction per gigabyte for operators like ourselves, and that feeds through into cost competitive and price competitive services for our customers. So against this, we have these discussions in 6G and where it might take us. There are proposals for even more extreme requirements, but say if that takes us beyond something which is physically or commercially realizable, then it becomes possibly less significant. 6G is also going into a period in which there'll be increasingly sharper constraints on spectrum, particularly in the low and mid-band spectrum opportunities. And that makes it more difficult to introduce a really radical new radio network. Extreme requirements come with much greater densification, which lead to more energy consumption if we're not careful. And that again takes us in the opposite direction to really where we want to go to as an industry, which is reducing our energy consumption and transitioning to low carbon networks, which is absolutely critical for us all, not just in our industry, but for society in general. And as an operator, we're always striving to improve simplification, both within our network and the services that we deliver to our customers. So we need to be cautious that we're not introducing added complexity in 6G, which might make it difficult to commercialize future services. So one way in which we try to influence the direction of travel for 6G is through participation in one of these organizations. There are several others, but NGMN, a Next Generation Mobile Network, is quite unique in that it's driven by the mobile operators. So it's an opportunity for the mobile operators to spell out their vision and use cases and requirements going forwards. So as well as mobile operators, there are also vendors and research institutes that contribute to the deliverables and the work that this organization performs. So for example, they have published a document on use cases and analysis earlier this year, and they're currently working towards setting out 6G requirements, which will be published probably early next year. And hopefully taken together, these can help to shape the direction of travel for other organizations such as ITU and the direction of travel for 6G. Right, so I said I'd just come back and close on, how can we take end users' input and how can we ensure that that shapes the direction going forwards? So we do seek end users' engagement in organizations such as NGMN, but the other way of looking at it, and from a Vodafone perspective at least, we've been deploying cellular systems for over 30 years. We've got 300 million plus subscribers. We've got 30 million odd customers on fixed. We've got over 100 million on IoT. And many of the requirements that we have today and have had in previous generations, they will transition into 6G in a consistent way. And what our customers really tell us is that they want reliable, secure, trusted communications. It needs to be price competitive for the services that they want to consume. There's an increasing trend both in enterprise and in consumer towards converged services, particularly convergence over fixed and cellular systems. Our customers want simplicity. Our enterprise customers in particular want device longevity. So they want to be able to put their connectivity modules into machinery or vehicles that might be in use for multiple decades. So they don't want that device to become end of life prematurely. And in all cases, there has to be sufficient speed with sufficient latency for the type of service and application that's being consumed. And that varies greatly depending on what that particular service is. Some services are sufficiently served with kilobits per second data rates, and some require very high megabit per second or hundreds of megabit per second data rates. So we have a broad view of what our end users wish, and that's from experience. And I think what we will find, certainly from our perspective, is that we will be market driven. There will be adjustments to some services, and it will be a reflection on where the market takes us and the new features that our customers ultimately demand that will give us the direction of travel towards 6G. So that was my opening remarks, Matthew, and I'm going to hand back to yourself now. So thank you very much for the time.
Great, thanks very much for that introductory presentation there, David. I think that's been a fantastic way to kind of frame the debate, how we've got to where we are today, and some of the kind of big questions that 6G is going to face as it goes through its development cycle. To take the debate forward, I'm going to invite Kimberly Parsons-Tromler to take the floor. Now, Kimberly is Managing Director of I guess a kind of a think tank. It's always called ThinkNet 6G. Essentially, I'm going to paraphrase it for Kimberly. I'm sure she's going to give us a much better description of what it is. But from my understanding, it's an organization that's there to make sure that all stakeholders in Bavaria have an early and clear voice in the development of 6G, and I guess perhaps some other technologies too. So Kimberly, I'm going to give the floor to you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thanks.
Okay. So, thanks, Matthew. Also, thank you, David, for a really good introduction. Hello, everybody. Also, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Kimberly Tromler, and I'm the head of ThinkNet 6G, and probably many of you have never heard of ThinkNet 6G before today, so I have to explain it in a little bit more detail. As the name hopefully suggests, we're a think tank and a network in the sense of a community or ecosystem for 6G stakeholders. So anyone who's interested in 6G is welcome to participate in what we do. We're hosted at a company called Bayern Innovativ, which is Bavaria Innovation in English. So we're located in Bavaria, which is a large state in southern Germany. And we're funded by the Bavarian Ministry of Economic Affairs, Regional Development and Energy. So I should probably take a second just to say now, anything I say today is my personal opinion and not in any way endorsed by the Ministry of Economic Affairs. In fact, they probably don't know that I'm here today. So if I say anything you don't like, it's my fault and not theirs. So Bavaria Innovation is the innovation agency for Bavaria. So we focus a lot, obviously, on supporting industry and business in Bavaria. And we have a big focus on knowledge transfer. So transferring sort of new technologies and new knowledge from research and academia into industry, and also from larger industry into smaller industry. Because if I look, say, at the other companies that are here today, Vodafone and Bosch have their own innovation departments and probably don't really need our help. But the small and mid-sized businesses who don't run their own innovation departments, then we can support them in helping them be more innovative. One of the things we do a lot of for knowledge transfer is organizing workshops and conferences or writing white papers at different levels for beginners up to experts. As an example, we've published 2 white papers this year already. One is a really high-level introduction to 6G for people who've sort of never heard of it. It's just called 6 Questions About 6G. And then we have a second one that's just come out that's much more detailed insights into 6G, where we really go in more detail into, what are topics that the different parts of the wireless industry need to look at. Another thing we do a lot of is bringing different sectors or branches together. So think that 6G is only one of roughly 30 networks that we run, and the others are in mobility, automotive, energy, medicine. And so we always try to combine what we're doing with other sectors. So 6G plus automotive, 6G plus medicine, 6G plus energy, as an example. We don't actually do any of our own research, and we don't sell any products. The focus is really on the networking and bringing people together. So we can provide a neutral opinion because we don't have to sell anyone anything. They can accept our opinion or not. But we don't have our own agenda to push. We cooperate as much as we can with other organizations. So in the wireless area, with NGMM that David mentioned, with 6G World, who's organized the symposium today, with 6G Alliance in the US. And then we try to do activities together with them. So, we workshops together with NGMN so that the results are valid for both. When I think about who's setting the agenda, David talked a lot about the end users. In our particular case, the focus has been more on industry users, so different sectors, automotive, mobility, etc., less on the normal people on the street, except in one case where we've been looking quite a bit at sustainability, where the normal person on the street is actually quite concerned, but has very little influence over how sustainable or not sustainable the wireless industry may be. So when we get further into the discussion, I'll be talking probably a lot more about industry sectors than about the normal people on the street, even though we really need to pay attention to both. With that, I think I'll give back to you, Matthew, and the next person can introduce themselves.
Great, thanks for that, Kimberly. Yeah, definitely looking forward to hearing some more about some of those industry sectors that you mentioned there. So next, I'm going to introduce Andreas Müller, who works in corporate research at Bosch and is also the chair of the 5G ACIA, so heavily involved in the development of 5G. So I think well placed to give some great insights on how 6G is and should be developed. So Andreas, welcome, and I'm going to hand the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Matthew, and also hello everyone. Happy to be part of the panel today. And of course, Bosch is one of those vertical industry players. We are active not in just one vertical, but in many verticals, especially the industrial mobility sectors, but also in the building automation domain and so on. And so therefore, yeah, we have played an active role and are still playing an active role in the 5G space, but we also start now looking already at 6G and what is coming up next year. I think as Bosch, we have been active in 5G relatively early, at least if you compare this to other vertical players. So we had the first discussions and activities back in 2015, 2016, especially focusing on industrial and mobility. But still, that's later than where we are right now. So David outlined that we have these 10 years cycles typically, right? So 10 years ago, this would have been 2011 or 2012. So at that point in time, probably you would not have seen any Bosch representative on such a panel here. So that means this time with 6G, we are earlier. In 5G, we have done a lot, and we still have many activities. We are doing a lot on private networks, for example, in different areas. We're doing a lot on V2V, V2X applications. And recently, we also started to get more and more interested and excited about Open RAN and what Open RAN, for example, may imply and mean to different vertical industries, especially also when combined with private networks. So there's still many things ongoing on the 5G side. Again, as David has outlined before, despite all this, we are not there yet. So commercially, I think we are still below the expectations. Also personally, I was a bit more optimistic regarding the adoption of 5G in different vertical industries a couple of years ago. But I think it's just a matter of time. So don't worry that this all was just a big hype with nothing behind. It's just that things take a bit longer because we have many different changes. It's not a change of the technology, which is getting more powerful, more flexible, and so on. It's a change of ecosystems, of business models. Also, innovation cycles need to be adjusted, and so on. And all this takes maybe a bit longer than most of us would have expected before. Now, if you look at 6G, as I mentioned, so now we are earlier part of the 6G discussions than it was the case with 5G. And I think that's also important because now we got interested in mobile communications. We have already understood quite a bit about what this can do for us. And now we don't want to go away anymore. Right? So that's why we want to be part of this from the very beginning. And the transition from 5G to 6G is a little bit like the transition from a child to a grown-up. Right. So as a child, you first are exploring the world, you try to understand things, you are learning a lot. You have very high expectations and a bright vision, but also there is a lot of disappointment on the way. And I think that's a little bit the same how it was for us and also for other vertical users, certainly. But now as a grown-up, so we know what we want, we know what we can expect a bit more realistically, and we also want to make a difference. And that's what will come up even more than with 5G, with 6G in the future. So there's a bright future ahead, and I think very exciting times to be in, but there are also quite a number of challenges still to be overcome. What we see in 6G is that it can provide significantly higher value add to vertical industries than 5G can do so far and also will be able to do. And that's a good thing, because one of the challenges that we still have with 5G is that it's not so easy to come up with a really good business case. Yeah, there are different aspects contributing to this, but a higher value add out of the same technology, the same networks really helps to make it more attractive. And what we have to do is, of course, we have now to develop a bright vision. So I think that's where we currently are. So to understand where do we want to go to, what technologies are available, what can we do with them, and to really draw the picture, what will the world look like in 10, 15 years from now. And there are many interesting aspects in 6G. I guess we will certainly deep dive into that during the discussion. But then there are also these challenges, right? So, and these are, again, different natures. There are certainly technical challenges. So it's important that we understand what is feasible. How can we build a system? How can we make use of these new capabilities, like the integration of sensing capabilities in the network and so on? But there are also business-related challenges. And also, this is very important that we have a very good understanding of the economic value add from the very beginning. I think this was one of the shortcomings of 5G. 5G was the transition from the B2C to the B2B business. And maybe at the beginning, it was more the same mentality as before. So build it and they will come. But we have to really understand where is the value and what is an enterprise customer willing to pay, and then focus on those features and aspects with really good cost-benefit ratio. And this should be considered from the very beginning. Security, of course, is a major concern, a major topic. It always was, but we should continue this now with 6G, and especially the focus again on vertical applications. We have to work on business models and address the changes here. So what will future business models look like? What will the ecosystem look like? Is it still the old play with the network operators, the big infra vendors, and maybe end users, or will there be new roles also with Open RAN, private networks, and all these developments? And this may be 6G no longer just a network that as a service, an infrastructure as a service, but will more evolve into a platform as a service. And if yes, what does this mean, and what do really the business models look like here? But we should also not forget there are some societal challenges, and that we should take them very seriously. Right? So it's, I mean, I come from Germany as well, but I think it's the same for many other countries. Right? There is always there are concerns if a new technologies. There are always challenges. Sorry for that. Challenges with if new technologies are coming up, and this holds for mobile communications in particular. Some people are worried about the radiation and so on. And of course, if you now integrate new functionalities, again, sensing capabilities, artificial intelligence, if you have massive data available, of course, these concerns may become even more serious. And therefore, I think it's very important from the very beginning to have established a very close dialogue with the society as a whole, with different groups and so on, to be transparent about what is coming up, how this may work, what this may bring benefit-wise to the people, but also, of course, what the challenges are, because only this way we can get the acceptance that we need in order to make it a success in the end. And of course, just to conclude my short introductory statement, there's also this environmental aspect. Also, Kimberly briefly mentioned this already. Sustainability, of course, is something I think that is relevant for all of us. For Bosch in particular, we already, one of the companies is already carbon neutral. And we should, again, consider from the very beginning, what can we do in order to make the 6G system more sustainable, but also how can we make use of 6G in order to make our entire world, our economy and society more sustainable. And there's certainly a lot of potential in it. And therefore 6G may also become a key building block in order to achieve the sustainability development goals of the United Nations. So draw a little bit the big picture, but as I mentioned before, especially from the perspective of an enterprise like Bosch, it's very exciting to be part of it. We have very high expectations in 6G, but we should also not forget to make 5G right and to fulfill and complete the 5G vision. And with that, I'll give it back to you.
Great, thanks very much for that, Andreas. Yeah, definitely quite a few things you said in there that are on my list of questions to ask. So it's going to be good to explore some of those as the session evolves. So we're at the point of introducing our final panelists. Before I do, we've had our first question come in on the Q&A function. So just going to remind you, if what you've heard so far has prompted a question or two, don't be shy. Post your question on Q&A, and we'll do our very best to answer that as we go through the open debate. So with that, I'm going to introduce our final panelist. He's Pierre Janin, who is from the city of Rennes in France, and he's a councillor in charge of digital and innovation. So quite a fascinating perspective, I think, that Pierre's going to give us on how, I guess, a community is contributing to the development of technology. So Pierre, welcome, and I'm going to give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. I will share my screen before starting. Probably you see it well now. So just to complete what Matthew said, I'm an elected councillor at the city of Rennes, and I'm a new councillor, so I've been elected 2 years ago, and the first project, the first request that we or fight that we that people gave to me was to address the questions behind 5G technology deployment on a local territory, on a small local territory. So I decided, and this is what I want to present to you today. I decided to build what we call a debate, a consultation. So a moment where we discuss with citizens about this 5G technology. So just few information about the Rennes city. We are in the west part of France. We are close to Mont Saint-Michel and Saint-Malo. So I had to do some advertising about the city. We are a city that was involved in digital technology from a while. I don't know if someone recognizes the small screen on the top of the top right. This is a Minitel, and so digital technology is important in Rennes. We have a lot of jobs for a city which is about 260,000 people. A lot of companies, startups, and research, R&D also is very active in the city. So the questions that we had to address is what does it mean for the citizen to have the 5G technology deployed on a wide scale on our city? And what I decided to do is to create a debate. And there is a French sociologue would say it's important to debate to avoid fighting. Débattre pour ne pas se battre. I don't know if you understand in French, so there is a little game here, and it's important to try to go towards a collective intelligence. So really trust the citizens to discuss about some societal challenges in general, and even complex challenges such as 5G technology. And for me, it was like a political duty. You are elected, but it's not after the election that you don't have to listen anymore to citizen voices. You have to keep the the connection and the conversation with them all along the time you are elected. So the citizen involvement in such political decisions should follow a methodology which is very well known for people working on citizen participation. This scale is called the Arnstein scale, and it shows that the citizen involvement can go from the left side, which is a very basic involvement, you just inform, just a descending ways of involving citizens, towards the right side, where you really let leave the citizen taking the decision. Now, of course, there is something in between. That's what we do. In order to address the 5G technology, we decided to address it in a very systemic way, in a holistic way, taking into account all the aspects regarding 5G technologies. So not only about economy and jobs, but also about, as Kimberly said, also the ecological energy aspect, also the social and societal aspect, also addressed by or mentioned by Andrea, Andreas, health issues, but also how this, let's say, technology coming from national or international standards can benefit to the territory, and how we can be involved, how we can define a strategy around 5G for the benefit of the territory. So the methodology we follow was to address all these aspects about 5G technologies, following a usual SWOT matrix analysis. We taken 20 citizens which were randomly selected in the city, and we took also some other city councillors, so elected peoples, and there were two groups, and we worked with them under the supervision of a national warrant, national guarantor, which is a CNDP, which is a guarant of the quality of the methodology. And this is very important, and I will come back to that at the end. So we had a lot of meetings and workshops with the citizens on the different aspects mentioned before, and we invited a lot of experts, national, local experts, talking about different aspects. And not only, we also took the extremes regarding all these different aspects, and we invited these experts, and they were answering to the citizens' questions. After 4 months of work, we wrote, I say we, I was not part, of course, but they wrote a report. The two groups, so the elected peoples, I will say the politicians, and the randomly selected citizens, and they wrote a report about the diagnosis that they understood from the experts, the challenges extracted from the diagnosis, and the proposals that they emitted regarding the challenges, how we can address the different challenges. So what was the result of this 4 months work? What was interesting is that you were able to have a very balanced opinion, where the citizens exactly, I will say approximately exactly in the same way than the elected peoples, said, yes, 5G technology is interesting and may bring opportunities in professional areas like in the industry or in healthcare. But they were really questioning the personal, the private usage, and they really consider, when you look to the ratio about advantages, opportunities versus weaknesses and risks, they really say that maybe it's not a priority for our society. This was their conclusion. So what they recommended is to take several actions in parallel to the 5G deployment. Regarding the different aspects, we talked about transparency, sobriety, so sustainable technology, how we can ensure governance, keep governance of digital technology through this kind of infrastructures. Try to be aware about health issues. So we talk about not only wave exposure or emission exposure, but also about the health issues with regards to technology, digital technology, like too much time spent on screen, like the impact of social networks on kids and teenagers, so things like that were addressed also. So then, after this debate, what were the next steps? So we started to implement some of the actions recommended by the citizens. So we put some sensors within the city just to be transparent, to measure the exposure to the web with a measure every half hour in more than 10 locations in the city. We also work about how we can help citizens to be more informed and more comfortable with digital technology, which is a strong issue too. We created another citizen group to address all the different aspects of digital technology. That was interesting to see how when starting to discuss about 5G, the citizens were quite rapidly discussing about digital technologies in general. So we built a long-term group of citizens randomly selected also to start discussing about all the different aspects, AI or digital administrative processes. And another outcome, I would say, of this debate was that we defined what could be public politics of digital technologies on a city like Rennes, and we call it responsible digital technology. That is roughly and very rapidly that goes through the main challenges that we discussed already. So yes, definitely we should take into account the voice of the citizen. Matthew started by emphasizing the mistrust that the citizen may have with the 5G technology, and also it's clear that there is a progressive disconnection between science, technology, and economy on one part, and on the other part, citizens and some societal challenges that we are facing, like ecological challenges, climate change, equality, solidarity. And I think and this is what the citizen said, we have to put science, technology, and economy at the service of these societal challenges and not the inverse. That, of course, imply a co-design of technology with citizens. And in order to do that in a proper way, there are some methodological aspects that need to be followed, and I put some examples on this slide. You will on
Great. Thank you very much for that, Pierre. Fascinating insight into how a community's perspectives are kind of incorporated into, I guess, kind of planning for a city. So that brings to a close the kind of the first part of our session. Then we'll kind of formal introductory remarks from each of our panelists. I'm just going to remind you again that if you do have a question you'd like to ask, you can pose it on the Q&A section of the environment. So please don't be shy. Post your questions. I'm going to open, I guess, kind of with a fairly broad question, and that actually corresponds to one of the questions that we already have. And I guess, given some of the context that David gave us about how 4G and 5G development took place, and the nature of involvement so far from companies like Bosch, for example, in the development of 5G, I guess the question is, whether it's really even possible for 6G to take a significantly different path to how previous technology generations have manifested themselves, or is it already too late to kind of really do a genuinely user-led development of 6G, or are the vested interests from carriers, from equipment vendors too high? Is there too much vested interest for a kind of big change in the approach to be considered or realistic? Who wants to have a first crack at that one?
So I can chip in with some opening remarks if you want, Matthew.
Sure.
So is it too late to change? And is the process going to change? I mean, certainly from my experience, the process still looks very similar to previous cycles. You know, we're still seeing the ITU process, we're still seeing the type of research visions feeding into ITU requirements with the expectation it will influence spectrum decisions at World Radio conferences and so on and so forth. So there's still definitely a lot of inertia within the industry to do what it's done before. Now, I don't think that's, if we think about what 5G has mostly become associated with, that there is a broader definition which includes just about everything from a customer's perspective. Maybe when Pierre was asking his residents in his area, that 5G understanding might include many different aspects of communication in general. But within the industry, at least, when we talk about 5G deployments, we're normally associating it with the radio network, specifically what's called 5G NR, 5G new radio, which is a specification set within 3GPP. Now, as I mentioned, I don't think it's credible that we can keep on expecting a new radio interface to come along that's going to be 10 times faster or 100 times faster for lots of commercial and physical reasons, constraints on spectrum, the limits on power, limits on EMF and so forth. So I think the process has to change. I think the process has to change from one which to date has been mostly a radio discussion from a technology perspective to one which is much more broad and one which really does, as Pierre was alluding to, encompasses what people really need out of digital communications in general. And in our view, that's a combination of multiple connectivity options and a focus much more on the services and the platforms that we deliver, and having an agile approach to being able to deliver new services rather than being too closely associated with a specific variant of the radio interface. So yes, I do think there needs to be a change. I don't think that change is there yet, and there's still an existing momentum and inertia in the industry as a whole.
Andreas, maybe I'll bring you in. I mean, it sounds like Bosch has been, fairly heavily involved in the development of 5G. Is a company like Bosch or the industry association that you're chairing got the appetite to kind of really push for a difference in how 6G is developed and the voice of the user in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's why one of the reasons why I'm here today, right? So we are looking into 6G already. We want to make sure that we get it done the right way from the very beginning, because it's always easier than if you're part of it from day one and not only coming in a couple of years later, because then many things have already been agreed upon, decided, and so on. And then it's difficult to get things changed. And I think that's true for Bosch. It's to some extent also true for 6GSymposium, for example, and other organizations. But yeah, we are still more focused today, at least, on getting 5G right? Because as mentioned before, there's still a lot of work to be done there as well. We have now some first activities in 6GSymposium, also looking at 6G, but it's still a relatively small activity compared to the 5G activities that we still have. Now, on a very high level, I fully agree with David, right? So the general process with the ITU will probably be the same as before. Also, 3GPP most likely will play still an important role for the development towards 6G. But there will be certainly changes if you look at the details. For example, that what players are active in 3GPP. I mean, before it was the traditional telco ecosystem. It has changed already a bit with 5G. So now you can see players like Bosch, but also our other peers in the market, car manufacturers, industrial automation companies, and so on. And I would assume that this will continue and that we will see more and more verticals there. But we should also make sure then that we make it as easy as possible for the verticals to get directly engaged in 3GPP, right? So it's a bit difficult because the way 3GPP is working now is because it has been designed like this about 20 years ago for the classical ecosystem, for the classical B2C business. And of course, you could not involve the end users at that point in time, because this was you and me just as an end customer using a mobile phone. So now it's different, but still for the vertical industries, mobile communications is not a core business. For us, it's a building enabler, it's a building block for many things. So that will become even more important in future, but it's not a core business. That's why Bosch is a big company with more than 400,000 employees, but we cannot really send dozens of engineers to 3GPP meetings. So we should think about ways to simplify that, to make it easier for vertical players to get engaged. But I also would believe that 3GPP will not be the only organization playing a certain central role here, right? We see this now already with 5G, with Open RAN, for example, with the Overrun Alliance. Of course, we have all the industry associations like 5G-SRA, 5G-AA, which, from my perspective, will continue to play an important role also on the journey towards 6G. And also things like open source initiatives and so on may play an increasingly important role. Right? So that's again a consequence of the virtualization, softwareization of the technology. And maybe then things like APIs and so on can also be developed there, and maybe much faster and easier than it is the case for 3GPP. So we will see the changes. If you really zoom in on a high level, it will remain the same. But I also fully agree with what David said. So we should not just think about 6G in terms of just a better air interface, right? And just stretching the KPIs as before. So of course, we will also see higher data rates, maybe lower latencies and so on. From my perspective, that's not really where the real potential of 6G is. It's more the new capabilities. I mentioned sensing, certainly artificial intelligence is also something to mention, but also then, as I already mentioned before, so changing from a network infrastructure to a platform, to an application enablement platform, it can easily be used then in many different vertical industries, so that we don't have to realize everything for an application over the top, as it's maybe done today, but that it's basically merging the applications with the platform, with the 6G network. And that's why we have to think in terms of solutions. And I think that's what I also understood from David's comment. So it's still a change, but not a radical change, more an evolutionary development.
Great, thanks, Andreas. I'm going to bring in Kimberly there, because I think one of the things you mentioned there was, it's important for a company like Bosch for your voice to be heard more clearly and loudly, I guess, in these processes, and that's not always easy. And I guess to some degree, that's what Kimberly thinks like think that 6G are there to do, is to magnify the voice of those kind of big industrial users. So, I mean, is that how you see things? And I guess that even for an organization like yours, there's then a challenge of how do you actually get your users' voice heard within that bigger, more complex process with all those different competing interests?
Oh, definitely. When I wanted to follow up on Andreas anyway, so he says, there's some of the large industries are now taking part in 3GPP, but it's sort of heavyweight industries. It's manufacturing and automation, and it's automotive. But there's plenty of other industries who have no connection right now, but who probably should. Like when I think that one of the proposed main use cases for 6G is, say, holographic meetings. Where are the Zoom and Teams people? Or where's the entire gaming industry? Because that's a really cool use case for, say, a game, but they're not part of the discussion at the moment. And when I look at what Pierre presented, the normal people on the street, their priorities may be completely different. They may be saying we care more about sustainability and maybe trustworthiness than we do about bandwidth or latency. They may say to us, if we somehow were able to really ask them and really get them involved, they may say, no, yes, we want bandwidth because we want to stream things, but latency is not so important, but it must be absolutely 100% secure. And we don't have a good way. I mean, Pierre talks to his citizens, but does Pierre have a good way to get this input into the standard? And I'm going to propose that he doesn't at the moment. I mean, we can have conversations like this, and those who are involved in the standards might hear it and might take it with them, but we don't have a process for ensuring that it really does end up in the standards. And especially if we think, people say, 5G was for business, 6G is for the people, then we need the people more involved than business. And right now, business is very involved. Well, large business is very involved. Small business is not. And the people, they'll get whatever we give them and be happy with it.
Great. Well, that's a great lead in to bring Pierre back into the conversation. So Pierre, I guess that fascinating work you've done in the city of Rennes, I guess essentially how, a technology has been delivered to you as a community, and you're trying to make sure that it's working effectively for your community and not vice versa. So, I mean, can you see running, is it practical to kind of just run a similar process about a technology that doesn't exist to get people's kind of thoughts about what they want beyond this technology, and how would you go about that and get involved in this process?
Yes, so you all had very interesting remarks, and yes, that was very interesting to follow this 4 months of discussion between cities, and that was very interesting to see how they can be wise and talk about the collectivity and not only their individual cases, their individual issues and troubles. This was very interesting. One of the first remarks they had when they started discussing about 5G technology is that we can't do anything anymore. It's done. It's 5G is open. We have no control. We cannot say no. And that was from the French regulation. We were not able to oppose to the 5G technology on the city. So they said, if we cannot say no, why we are here, what can we do? And they discovered progressively that their voices can be taken into account. And I really enjoyed what Kimberly said. Maybe within the development of next standards, and I will tell them exactly what we discussed today. I mean, I'm also their voices, and this is interesting to see. And if we see later on in a few months, I can explain to you what your voices to them, what does it change, and to answer your second part of your question, Matthew. Yes, I think it's important to keep this discussion open for technologies that does not exist yet, or that we can work on scenario, and there are a lot of methodology for doing that, like design thinking and things like that. And this is, and to answer to the question of one of the audience, one people of the audience, yes, we are keeping this idea of having a group constituted for several years, and they are working all together to discuss for new project, new aspect of the digital technology. It could be 6G, it could be AI, it could be I don't know, drone or whatever. And it's important to keep the communication. Of course, it's only 20 people selected on more than 200,000. But we are thinking on ways to involve more people, maybe by involving digital technology. That's a way to connect to more people. Maybe extending a bit the number of people involved. A lot of communication on local media. It's important to be transparent also. Everything we do, videos, reports are available online. There are Creative Commons, and everything we do from the very beginning was very transparent, and we gave access to all the other cities in France to all of our materials. And so there are other initiatives like that. It's not only in Rennes. There was about, I will say, 15 big cities that had similar initiatives. So yes, I think it's important to keep that and keep that initiatives. What is interesting, and I will close my answer with that, what is interesting to do it in a local way, not in a national level, is because when you are elected at the city, you are really the closest to the citizens. So you are really close to their concerns, whereas at the national level, if you launch a national consultation, you lose something, so you have more distance. So what I would recommend, and we changed the ministries a few days ago, so I will recommend ministries to maybe to manage all local initiatives, but have a more descending organization and more deconcentrating organization where you dispatch like citizen voices debates locally. I definitely think it's very useful for defining new technologies.
Great, thanks a lot, Pierre. And I'm going to kind of connect a little bit there. Was something that Kimberly said, and it actually addresses a question that we had from the audience. And I think everybody's going to have a different perspective on this. And I guess it's this question of sustainability. You know, the question was about, you know, the use of rare materials and you know, the implications of that in technology. And I guess that kind of brings in the broader sense that I guess really 6G is the first technology for mobile that's being developed in the full consciousness of you know, a kind of zero carbon future, and you know, perhaps a kind of greater seriousness of the kind of being sustainable. So I mean, I guess the question is, how do you fit that in within the context of, you know, what 6G should be or will be, and how important are environmental considerations going to be, or should they be, in the development of 6G compared to 5G or 4G, and yeah, what are the different stakeholder perspectives on that right now? I'm not quite sure who wants to kick off with that one.
I can chip in to start with again, Matthew, if that's okay. I mean, to start with, 5G was actually designed quite carefully to address energy consumption. There's a specific feature on the radio interface to ensure that you only transmit basically when there's information to transmit, whereas the previous generation of 4G had a lot of what was called pilot information, broadcast information, to maintain the background connection even when there was little traffic. So 5G has taken quite significant steps on the air interface, on the radio interface, and that's probably, you know, the larger part of the energy savings that could have been identified. Going forward,
sorry, David, sorry to interrupt. On that, how much of that do you think was motivated by climate emission concerns, or was it just the perspective that the industry knew that data consumption is going to go up hugely and you needed an economically viable way of delivering that, given that there's a strong relationship between, you know, data consumption and energy consumption in the networks?
I can't be 100% certain, but my view is that it's probably more motivated by energy consumption and commercial reasons, you know, just it costs money to consume energy, and environmental reasons. I mean, some of these features don't actually help to significantly increase the capacity. It's not a capacity issue, it is genuinely an energy reduction feature. So it has been done for good reasons. But what that does point to is that, you know, some of the easy gains that are available have been addressed with 5G. Going forwards, it's very much more difficult to maintain even further increases. So I think, you know, the big challenge, and I know Kimberly's talked about the elephant in the room in the past, the big challenge that we face as an industry is that we are facing this ongoing exponential growth in demand and capacity in general. And how do we deliver that in a way in which, you know, maintains a reasonable expenditure of energy, and that we can offset in different ways and hopefully produce a net zero outcome. And it's how do we deliver that capacity to, you know, ideally we have to reduce the amount of energy per gigabyte delivered. And if we can, you know, if we can do that efficiently, it gives us some room to continue to grow the network, to increase the total supply. But it's not easy. And there's, you know, that's the real big challenge that we're all facing. We can't pretend that we can keep on delivering hundreds or thousands of times increase and not have an impact in energy. You know, something has to give.
Andreas, maybe I can ask you, kind of linked to this. I mean, as an industrial user of 5G, I mean, is there an obvious gap in what 5G doesn't do, which you're wishing it did do, and therefore is an obvious candidate for 6G?
I mean, now feature-wise in general, so not related to the sustainability topic, but it's a more general question, if I got you right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It depends, I would say, right? So it depends on what you are looking at. So if you look at the classical quality of service parameters, what 5G can offer or what it promises to offer, I would say that's already good enough for really most of the applications, even in a domain with very demanding requirements like the manufacturing industry. The thing is, we are not there yet, right? So what we have today is typically release 15, and release 15 does not provide all these capabilities that 5G really offers, and it really make a difference to other wireless standards like Wi-Fi or so. Release 15 is still about mobile broadband, and it's a fair starting point, but what makes a difference then is the low latency, the high reliability, and so on. But here I would say for the vast majority of applications that we see today, at least if we think just in terms of connectivity, with release 16, 17, and so on, most of these applications probably will be possible to cover them. So again, the real difference with 6G is then not the even lower latency or even higher data rate. It's the new capabilities. It's the special, for example, integrated sensing, right? So that we can use the network as a sensor, sense the environment. Then you can many fancy things with it. In a factory, for example, you can detect where there are boxes standing around. You can use this to support the navigation of automated guided vehicles, inventory management, and so on. All these things can be supported with the same infrastructure, ideally without any, or at least without significant additional cost. And it's then also resource sharing, for example, which is very attractive, right? So AI as a service, compute as a service. So these are things that started with 5G already. Edge computing is not new, but it can be taken to the next level with 6G, providing hardware acceleration for artificial intelligence and so on. And this, to come back to the previous question, also then is again supporting the sustainability goals, right? So if we can reuse resources, if we don't have to deploy high compute capabilities in every end device and so on, so then that is good for the environment. It's also good from a business perspective because simply you can have cheaper devices and so on. And to all this, 6G certainly can contribute. And it's also then things like support of massive digital twinning, right? So also digital twin is not new, but the 6G network, if we think of it in terms of a platform as a service, may provide base services to support a digital twin and to also then combine the different digital twins from different devices, different solutions, and so on. And then again, you can use that to manage, for example, a factory, but also other areas much more efficiently and much more easily as well. So there's a lot of potential, but it's not the classical KPIs. So that really make a difference, and that's why we should, especially focus more on these new capabilities that are currently being discussed with 6G.
Yeah, Kimberly, please.
Oh, I'd love to take this one. You're going to have to cut me off. I'm going to come back to what David said, especially about energy savings. For an operator, energy is one of their biggest costs. So they have a huge vested interest in reducing energy. But in some ways, they can't because they're so dependent on other factors. David mentioned also our elephant in the room is exponential growth, right? We've got exponential growth in demand for the number of bits, which brings with it exponential growth in the amount of equipment you end up having to provide. And an operator, say Vodafone, is forced to buy equipment that's on the market. So they don't have a lot of control over how much energy that equipment needs or what kind of rare metals went into the equipment. And then wherever their towers are, they need electricity. And yes, they're reducing the demand for electricity as much as they can, but they still need something. And the something is whatever they get from the energy provider in that location, right? They can't provide themselves, 100% renewable energy. They can only buy what's available on the market in that location. So they're, like I said, they're dependent on other parts of the industry to be able to reduce their own emissions. And someone mentioned in the questions the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 goals. There's 4 of them that really specifically talk about mobile coverage. But if you look in more detail, actually the wireless industry contributes to all 17 of the goals somehow, generally by providing internet access so that people can do the thing they need to do to reach the goal. And the GSMA did a really interesting study, and GSMA themselves may not be the most neutral organization to ask about this, but GSMA's numbers, they looked at all 17 of the goals and looked at what the contribution of the wireless industry could be to that goal. And on average, the industry are only contributing 50% of what they could be contributing. So there's still a lot of room for improvement with what we already have. Even the best one, let me have a file open here. The best we're doing is 64%. So very roughly 2/3. We still have another whole 1/3 of potential contribution that we're not actually doing yet. And if I look at another one, there's a company called the Science-Based Targets that sets, generally for the IT industry, so including the wireless industry, set targets for sort of how to get to net zero, and they provide guidance and, you know, how do you do this for your particular company. And they said within the wireless industry, 1/3 of the industry have committed to reaching net zero by 2050. And I don't know how closely all of you guys follow the IPCC report that came out, I believe in March was the last one. Basically said the entire world, including the wireless industry, must reach net zero by 2050 if we want to stay at the 1.5-degree target. So we have a clear must, you know, we must reach net zero by 2050. And at the moment, we only have 1/3 of the industry committed to that target, which if you turn it around, means we have 2/3 of the industry not committed to that target. We've got twice as many that have not committed yet. And part of it is because they can't, right? While we're dealing with exponential growth, you cannot realistically commit to that kind of target. Because how is an operator supposed to get down to net zero at the same time as they have to provide exponentially more service than before? And if we come back to our original question, who sets the agenda, right? It's people in society using these services and generating demand. It's the same people in the same society who need us to get down to net zero. So where do we discuss this? How do we get people involved? And realistically, my personal opinion now is we need to work on reducing demand. How do we convince society and companies who are also using 5G to reduce their demand? It seems impossible. It might be impossible. But the energy industry is managing to reduce demand. But of course, it took them decades of debates, right? And I think we're only at the very beginning of possibly decades of debates, except the year 2050 is only 28 years away. We don't have decades left. So who sets the agenda? Who decides? Do we build more? Do we build out the network? Do we provide more coverage and more bandwidth? Or do we say, no, we're staying with where we are, deal with it, people, because we can't grow anymore if we want to somehow get to net zero.
I mean, it's a really good opportunity to bring PM, because I guess a question for you around the sustainability. To what extent were sustainability concerns voiced by the citizens of REN, and to what extent does REN already or would REN think about in the future about how it provides permits to carriers or other network providers, you know, taking into consideration their responsibilities around sustainability, for example? Is that a way for you guys to influence, the future path?
Very, very relevant question, Matthew, very relevant. Yes, in part, I mean, knowing what a city can do alone, which up to now we cannot do a lot of things regarding 5G technology. The only way to say something is to control the request and to control where the antennas are deployed, and to say maybe you can use this building rather than this one. So, but yes, we are thinking, rather than to think about regulation, we are thinking about collaboration. So we are now, when I say now, it's we are in the process now of discussing with the main actors in IT, and of course in the operators, the telecom actors. We are discussing about our strategy of a responsible digital technology. That's mean also sustainable, of course. And we are discussing how we can do that locally. So, for example, recycling, for example, optimization. So it's a first step, and I think I will say the first step is really that people are starting thinking. When I say people, I mean companies and even yourself and major actors of IT, starting thinking about and being informed by the IPCC report, for example. All the citizens read most of it, and so they were very aware about this report. So yes, definitely, this is something we can do together. It's a collaboration. I don't believe in pure regulation. I mean, it's a way to do it, but it's not enough. In order to go faster, as Kimberly said, we don't have time, we don't have decades. So regulation probably is not the best solution, because as you see, if you see the existing regulation, they are not really, it's too long. And so maybe a way to do is to start by making people aware about the different challenges, the main companies, and also the young generation. I mean, I don't know what about Vodafone or Bosch, but I know that the main IT industry in Rennes have difficulties of recruiting, because the young generation is not asking for high salary. They are asking for what are your basic values regarding climate change challenges or whatever. And so I'm very pleased that we can be pushed by the younger generation to go further and faster. So yes, definitely. So to come back to your question, at the City of Rennes, we are trying to work into that direction, making people aware and trying to collaborate. So identifying actions that we can do together, even at the high level, because of course we have no control on the main on the major actors, the major manufacturers. We are nothing. The Rennes city is nothing on the map. But if you look to people, and if you go to discuss with people one by one locally, and yes, you may. It's a way to try to go faster. I don't know if it's the right way, but we are trying this way, and probably we have to conduct several ways and several strategies in parallel, and working with working locally, so not only in a global scale, but working locally with cities and also working with citizens should be part of the equation.
Thanks. We've got about 10 minutes left. There's a few things I want to get through, but before we get to the next topic, I'm just going to come back to David. One of the things Kimberly said was maybe we need to think about reducing demand. Now, I can't imagine Nick Reed or the other carrier CEO is thinking about a demand reduction strategy. But I mean, it is an important question. How do you balance that growing demand with a more kind of environmental consciousness?
Yeah, no, the thought I had in response, actually, we and other operators are increasingly converged operators. We deliver mobile and fixed connectivity. And if we think, a decade ahead, very high broadband connectivity will be ubiquitous, either fiber or DOCSIS, whatever's next. And Wi-Fi will be dominant in people's households as it is today. And I do wonder, you know, when I hear about some of the comments about augmented reality and virtual reality and high quality gaming and all the rest, how much of that actually needs to go over a cellular network? Because we as a converged operator should really be looking at it both from a cost perspective, clearly, but also from what's the lowest energy means of transferring data to the end customer. And maybe that transition will lead effectively to possibly at least a stabilization of the cellular demand, because if most of the demand comes from indoors, where there's other ways in which we can deliver that connectivity, maybe we can take that away from the growth in the cellular and make sure it's delivered in the most cost-effective, energy-effective way at a local network to the customer. And I think we will effectively move in that direction. That's my own personal view, because I don't think we can realistically sort of impose usage restrictions on people.
Okay, that's prompted some kind of responses there. So, and Andres, you had your hand up first, so please, you go.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to fully agree with David, basically, and to take it even one step further, right? So if you look back at the history of mobile communication, so at least 1G to 4G, these were very homogeneous networks deployed all over the country so that you can connect using your mobile phone everywhere at any time. With 5G, that already changed. So we have seen the introduction of private networks, for example, in a factory, in a hospital, and so on, to satisfy the special requirements that we have there. And I think with 6G, this trend will continue and will be taken to the next level. So that 6G is not really a homogeneous network where we can get sub-millisecond latency all over the place, because we don't need it all over the place, right? So we need some coverage layer, maybe in certain areas, and then we need it at very special spots, these new capabilities and the extraordinary performance that 6G probably will deliver. So it's more this network of networks paradigm, I think, which is very important. And I think this is maybe also the solution, right? To bridge the gap between this increasing number of applications with very demanding requirements on the one hand, and on the other hand, the SDGs, but also the business case and so on that still needs to be in it for the operators, for the enterprises and so on. So really, tailored networks for special purpose applications, which can also be easily customized and configured and so on, but not everywhere the same technology. That's probably one of the key aspects that that build a bridge basically between all these different aspects.
Kimberly, I think you wanted to come in there too.
Yeah, what occurs to me is the growth in demand, that we have very different types of growth and demand. I mean, the five of us here in the panel at the moment all come from a fairly privileged background, where we have decent coverage and we have cable coverage and we have electricity. And we have increasing growth and demand because we're doing more streaming and things like that. When I look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there will be growth and demand to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, because we need to provide coverage and better coverage to areas that are currently either underserved or not served at all. And as they come online, and we're talking about billions of people here, roughly 3 billion people have no internet access. When we add another 3 billion people to the network, of course we have growth and demand, but it's growth that we want, right? It's a positive growth. And then we have all the growth coming in from the IoT devices that are currently, you know, they're pilot projects or whatever, but eventually they'll all be mature. And then we'll have millions of devices, additional devices coming online there. I don't have an answer. I just see no stop in the growth, and that the sort of the exponent in the exponential demand probably increasing, when we need somehow to at least flatten it. I mean, David mentioned earlier, the industry has done an excellent job of bringing down the energy use per bit, right, from 4G to 5G and planned from 5G to 6G. But if we want to, you know, just sustain the status quo, then we have to be bringing the energy demand per bit down at the same rate as we're growing. We're growing exponentially, which would mean, okay, we need to get energy demand down exponentially, except we're moving towards an exponent of 0, right? We'll never reach 0. So it's not realistic to completely balance it out. We'll probably always have an overall increase in demand for energy. But someone asked in one of the questions, it's not necessarily bad because some of this energy then we're saving in other industries, right? If we digitalize a certain industry, then that industry now uses less electricity or has less emissions or whatever. And at the moment, we have a positive win. When we digitalize and the wireless or communications industry ends up producing more emissions because we've had to increase the size of the network, at the moment, the win is still positive. We end up decreasing somewhere else more. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Depending on what study you read, more or less, but at least it's positive at the moment.
Great. So we've got just under 5 minutes left, and I just want one final question I'm going to ask you, and I guess we'll have to just be conscious about how much time we give to the answers. But it's something that Andreas mentioned, I think being referenced elsewhere too, just this idea that the network is going to become like this big sensory mass, which is obviously very different to what networks are today. And so I guess there's a question there, maybe we're already seeing it a bit with 5G, where you've got private enterprise 5G networks which sit outside the traditional carrier domain. I mean, is it possible that in the future, the 6G elements, which are maybe more kind of sensor driven, would be better delivered by somebody that isn't a carrier, or that it's going to create an opportunity for somebody else to kind of create? So you're going to get this kind of disaggregation of the network. You've kind of got a core network that's run by the carriers and an edge network that has all these kind of sensory capabilities that's run by lots of other people. Perhaps, for example, the city of Rennes might want to manage some of that stuff itself because it's so sensitive in terms of the data that it's collecting and monitoring. Who wants to have a first go at that one? Pierre, you guys going to be running a sensory network for Rennes?
Yes, we have some initiatives. Yes, definitely. I mean, the notion what you emphasize, the notion of control and sovereignty and governance of sensitive, let's say, infrastructure for the city is really a challenge. So, for example, we build our own fiber network on the city that guarantee a proper communication and high bandwidth for university, hospitals, and some non-profit organizations that they almost don't pay. So when you are in infrastructure belong to the city, you are able to use it as a tool for your, let's say, social politic or environmental politics. So this is also something which is important. For me, everything, and I'm also making the connection with the previous discussion. For me, it's a question of having innovation, having industry working in a sustainable way, in a responsible way. So if this responsible way has to reduce the demand, why not? If the responsible way has to reduce the production of hardware, yes, we have to do that. We have to take this decision and maybe trying to find better ways, clever ways to use this power, this energy, these resources that we have on Earth, and try to focus it towards solving what I said at the beginning: ecological challenges, societal challenges, as Kimberly said. We are quite lucky in our societies. I remember when people from the ministry coming in Rennes recently and say 5G technology will allow you to watch a HD movie in a fast train. For me, this is not responsible or sustainable. I mean, you cannot explain the need for a new technology with all the resources needed and all the efforts and the intelligence that you see here. Focus on just being able to watch a HD movie on a TGV fast train. For me, it's meaningless. So we have to put our energy and our life. We have a short-term life. We have to put our energy, life, and resources, limited resources, towards solving most important goals and challenges.
So we're in our last minute, I think. So maybe David, from your perspective, I mean, how significant a change does 6G seem or feel to a carrier, and how significant do you think a carrier like Vodafone's going to have to change to take full advantage of what 6G could be?
Uncertain at the moment, Matthew. Our view is that whatever happens, it will be built very much on the foundations of 5G, and as Andreas has mentioned, that's got a long life left. We see those fundamentals going well into the next decade and beyond. So 6G will be a sort of more gradual transition to that. How that storyline then is positioned in different markets remains to be seen. We talked a lot about convergence. We can see that increasing over time. And this suggestion that there's more features, there's this joint sensing and communications, all that sounds quite interesting. But the question that remains there, are we inventing the Swiss Army knife, where you try to do a network that can do absolutely everything, or are there some things which are better left alone? And as mobile operators delivering a cellular network in the first case, we need to make sure that we're not undermining anything to do with wide area, core connectivity, high mobility, low energy consumption, and all the good things associated with the services people primarily take for granted today. And if we can extend that, great. But let's build in 5G, make sure that works, make sure that delivers properly, and that will deliver us the good foundation for the future.
Great, well, thanks for that, David. I'd love to bring in Andreas and Kimberly again, but unfortunately I've been given the nod that it's time to wrap up the session. It's been fascinating to hear such a wide range of incredibly well-informed views. So I thank you on behalf of everybody listening to our panelists today for taking time out to share your thoughts with us, and hopefully we'll cross paths again in the near future.